Live from Washington, D.C., this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Sponsored by Shell. Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Dan Ronan. We're pleased to host this conversation with leading figures in the transportation, trucking, freight, and logistics industries. We've got a great guest today, and we'll be talking about a very important topic, truck safety, among other things. Along with my TT colleague, senior reporter Eugene Mulero, our guest is the new administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Robin Hutcheson, who was recently confirmed by the United States Senate and sworn into that office at the Department of Transportation. Before we begin our conversation with Robin Hutcheson, I want to tell you that Shell is our sponsor for Newsmakers. Their leadership has a short message they'd like to convey to all of us. So let's watch the message together, and then we'll be back on the other side with Robin Hutcheson and Eugene Mulero after this break. A little bit about our guest, Robin Hutcheson. She serves as the administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. She had previously served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Safety Policy at the United States Department of Transportation in the Biden-Harris administration. Before being appointed to this position, she was the Director of Public Works in the city of Minneapolis and also the Transportation Director for Salt Lake City. Eugene and Robin, thank you for joining us. It's good to have you here on Newsmakers. We begin our conversation with TT's Eugene Mulero.
Madam Administrator, I want to thank you for joining us as well. And diving right into it, if you can walk us through what your first few days on the job have been like, getting used to the workflow at FMCSA as the newly confirmed administrator. I know you've been there already. And also, there's a lot of attention being paid to truck parking, not only on Capitol Hill, but also your agency and the US DOT. So when it comes to truck parking, what are the next steps that FMCSA is doing to address the issue?
Thanks, Eugene, for those kickoff questions. And first, let me say how pleased I am to be with you today. Thank you so much for having this conversation. And I want to open up by saying these first few days, week or so, as the confirmed administrator of FMCSA has renewed my commitment to drivers, companies, the truck driving profession, and has really kept that spotlight on. So for the last 9 months or so, I have been serving as the acting and the deputy administrator. And in that time, I realized there's a bright spotlight on the trucking industry right now. And it is largely because of COVID. Americans began to understand where their goods came from in a way that they didn't before. And maybe it was just that a package was late to their doorstep. But Americans now can really see that there is an industry of professionals that ensure goods movement. we know this, you know these numbers, 75% of all goods probably came on a truck. And with this attention, we now also have resources to solve some of the problems, remove obstacles for drivers and companies, and to make it as safe as it possibly can be with new policy as well. So in these first few days, I've been reviewing some priorities. I've been aligning our staff towards these priorities. I've been working with our stakeholders, just as I always have since the first day. Some of what I'm doing is simply a continuation of my commitment to openness and transparency. And some of what I'm doing is really doubling down on some of the priorities that we have for trucking, for safety, and really for my staff as well.
Administrator, there's a great deal of concern, as you know, and a number of people have talked about this issue of truck parking. If you go in just the Washington, D.C. area where we live, it's not uncommon to see trucks parked on the side of the road or in the best we could describe as dangerous situations. I know that this is something that your administration and Secretary Buttigieg are concerned about, but doesn't this also require a certain commitment, not just from the government, but also the private sector as well, to get involved in this, to build more rest areas, state governments to make more land available? Doesn't this also require, can't just be the federal government saying, we're going to carve out this acreage. It also seems to be private sector, state government, and local. And then local always runs into the problem, too, of the well-known phrase, not in my backyard. People want their goods and services, but they don't want the trucks parked, within 100 or 200 yards of their homes.
So answering part B of Eugene's first question and your elaboration on the question, truck parking, if I'm coming back to the priorities that we have, truck parking is among one of our top priorities, and it is for Secretary Buttigieg as well. Last week, the Secretary kicked off and hosted a truck parking coalition meeting with over 300 participants. We've given 2 grants for infrastructure that expands the capacity for truck parking, 2 different states. And we've also issued grants to use technology to improve how drivers might find parking to make it more efficient. So we're already starting to see some good movement, some good positive movement in our commitment to improving truck parking. It's a safety issue. We've heard from drivers across the country. They cannot find a place to rest. When they do, they're sometimes in places where they don't feel safe or secure, for that matter. So we have a safety imperative to continue to raise this up as a top priority. And you asked about some of the things we're doing from FMCSA. I can tell you that one thing is we're very able and probably in the best position to help define the problem. Why is it important? We can tell you why it's important because we hear it from the drivers. So elevating that story and the voice of the industry and the drivers to the entire DOT who have a responsibility to tackle this problem is one role we play. But more to the point and more on the ground, we have presence in every single state in the United States. And we have shared with our teams in every state the new guidebook for truck parking, and we have asked our teams to provide additional technical assistance to state and local governments who have a role to play in expanding and creating new truck parking. So we've got some direct activity from FMCSA in addition to the ongoing grants that competitive grants that we have available in the coming years. Of course, public and private partnerships will always be a strategy to focus on, and I was very pleased to see members of the private sector and the public sector all participating in that truck parking coalition meeting last week.
Madam Administrator, another focus of USDOT as well as the administration is the implementation of the $1 trillion infrastructure law. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, nearly every day I hear a new announcement. I hear your administration, tout its enactment. We're approaching the 1-year mark in November. Can you help our audience understand FMCSA's role in the implementation of the IIJA?
I'm happy. I'm happy to do that. It is a once in a generational investment. The Biden-Harris administration and the DOT really worked hard on what is truly a bipartisan infrastructure law. What this does for FMCSA is it gives us both policy and additional resources to advance our mission of safety. And in that policy, we're offered new ways to think about safety. So I'll break this down in a few ways. The first is just within FMCSA. In the bipartisan infrastructure law, there is identified a number of research items. And these are items that help us understand root causes of safety. Mm-hmm. So a study on compensation and compensation structure. How does that affect drivers and their safety? A study on detention time. I was on a ride-along. I learned a lot about detention time. We know that it affects drivers and their ability to pick up, drop off, and make deliveries within the hours that they have. We're bringing new voices to the table. So the bipartisan infrastructure law has established the Women of Trucking Advisory Board. We just announced that about 2 weeks ago. We'll convene that board very soon. These are new voices at the table. Only 7% of drivers are women. We need to understand why. We are soon to be announcing, and soon meaning I'm not sure exactly when, but soon to be announcing a truck leasing task force to understand the perspectives from individuals who have been in potentially unfavorable leasing conditions for their trucks, which affects their long-term viability in the industry. We know from data that the longer somebody drives, the safer they are. So those are some of the policy-related things that we are doing. We also have a deep dive study on the causes of large truck crashes underway now that is also authorized in the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's the policy and research work, which sometimes we don't talk quite enough about, but we're pretty confident we're going to have a better understanding of what drives safety for drivers that is wrapped up in the working conditions for drivers. Then there's the money. We have something like a 50% increase in some of our formula programs, a 90% increase in some of our grant discretionary or competitive grant programs. We have the ability to make every single dollar count in our competitive grant programs, and this means increasing the number of CDL holders by providing scholarships for training programs. It means investing in technology, just for example, as I mentioned before, helping drivers find parking, and a whole host of other competitive grants that we will issue. That there's a lot more. There are many more resources for state and for local governments and for community colleges and everyone who helps to improve safety on our roadway and also byproduct improving our economic strength as well. It's a long answer, and I even have a part. The part 3 on that is that, working together with federal highways and others, the secretary really likes to say that infrastructure is a trucker's office. So we should not ignore that improving roadways and bridges these are vital investments for the truck driving community.
Administrator, last year, at the end of last year, there were a lot of discussions about the workforce development issue, a number of the internship program, the apprentice program that Labor Secretary Walsh and Secretary Buttigieg worked very closely on. The private sector, again, the Chamber of Commerce was very involved in bringing military men and women into the trucking industry. And the industry has an aging workforce. It has a driver shortage. How do you keep the momentum up so that these type of programs, they get a lot of attention, they get a lot of initial interest, but how do you keep the momentum so that these continue to pay dividends and we see more people getting into the industry? What's your strategy on this?
The Biden-Harris Truck Action Plan was a kind of a watershed moment for folks. We had a celebration with a couple hundred people on the South Lawn when we finished a 90-day sprint. That started the momentum, is bringing together government and industry, using the partnerships between the Department of Labor and the Department of Transportation and Veterans Affairs. We have started this momentum. We maintain this momentum by first and foremost doing what we need to do, the Safe Driver Apprenticeship Program, which we launched last month. We are taking applications and reviewing those applications. By continuing our partnership, bringing more veterans into the workforce. We did a recent event at a community college in which we heard directly from veterans who had entered trucking, and this community college happened to be a recent grant recipient from FMCSA. So really keeping an eye on how we expand opportunities for veterans and really many underserved communities for which this is a really great opportunity to enter a really good profession. Those are just a few ways we keep the momentum up, and really the apprenticeship programs, that's an excellent partnership that we continue to focus on and we continue to make progress on. We want to focus very much also on retention as well. And the better trained a driver is coming in, the more that we can pair them with good apprentices, the more likely that driver is successful from the get-go and stays in the profession.
To stay on the topic of workforce, do you have an update on the Safe Driver program, the apprenticeship for drivers under 21?
The Safe Driver Apprenticeship Program, we launched it last month, or about 6 weeks ago. We are accepting applications online, and we are in the process of reviewing those applications. We were able to kind of set a first tranche of drivers, approve them, and now we're working on the next now. So it is underway. We have kicked it off. It is rolling.
And when you look at
what can be done, Administrator, to bring in more folks in underserved communities? As you pointed out, about 7% of the trucking industry is women. There's a lot of discussion about how more minorities, if they would be brought in, this is a real way to get a middle, in some cases an upper middle class career started. What needs to be done? Is it more at the high school level, the college level? What needs to be done to encourage more folks who are in these underrepresented communities to look to trucking and transportation as an industry?
Great question. This is very much a partnership that we need to have with industry, and I can talk a little bit about how we're thinking about it and what we're doing from FMCSA. We have a team of folks who are focusing now on making every grant dollar count. We have an increase in resources through the bipartisan infrastructure law. We sit at the intersection of safety, economic strength, and equity. So bringing new potential recipients to the table. Often there are communities that don't know how to get to the table. Have you read a NOFO? They're not easy. It's not easy. They sometimes need help to understand where to look, how to read it, how to apply. So we have an effort right now to increase our reach, to bring new folks to the table to compete for this money. The other thing, and you bring it up, we have a very strong focus on gender equity. We see deep inequities in this workforce. Really top to bottom, and my own organization is not free from that. We see a dearth of women in this industry. So this Women of Trucking Advisory Board will help us understand the barriers to entry. Then once we have that understanding, we can look at how to remove those obstacles for entry into the workforce. So we're looking forward to learning more from folks who have experienced this industry as a woman, what they've experienced and how that can be very instructive for us.
Madam Administrator, to stay on this point, I've spoken with stakeholders and advocates and proponents of, inclusivity and equity. Maybe I want to give you the forum that in your own words, and this may seem obvious to some, could you talk about the benefits of having a diverse workforce and having greater inclusivity, and then, what are the benefits of having, different perspectives, not only from women, but people from underrepresented backgrounds?
Equity is a journey we all take. We all come from our own backgrounds with biases that are built in. The more we understand each other, the stronger we are. Having a diverse workforce for us in FMCSA is essential. And I honestly had not planned to talk about this during the interview, but I'm prepared to, because we are taking action in our own organization to increase the diversity of our workforce. We have a recruitment team right now that is focusing on, with the bipartisan structural law, we have the opportunity to hire folks, but we want to make sure that we're hiring the most inclusive and diverse workforce that we can. We have a team dedicated to that right now. People should be able to see themselves in FMCSA, and they should be able to see themselves in a workforce. And that is the strongest, in my opinion, one of the strongest ways we attract a diverse workforce is you can see yourself doing that job, because someone that looks like you or sounds like you does that job. That's great recruitment. And then that's great opportunity for folks to join our ranks. It's an amazing profession, top to bottom. It isn't just the drivers. We're very focused on driver safety, but it is also all of the other things that go into making the supply chain as strong as it can be and as safe as it can be. It is, right down to inspectors and investigators, which it's a big part of our work. If someone can see themselves doing that job, they're more likely to want to join us. And we need that. We need that diverse workforce.
Administrator, if I can pivot and change topics a little bit, we are in South Florida in a recovery mode and trying to rebuild and restart the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who were impacted by Hurricane Ian a couple of weeks ago now. FMCSA has an emergency order in effect till the 29th of October regarding hours of service. Do you anticipate that being extended? And also there's been some concern, I've talked with some folks in Florida, that they like the fact that FMCSA did this so quickly, but they're still sticking to the same regulations and not going beyond what the government has been giving them, because they're nervous about if something, heaven forbid, were to happen with an accident of some sort, that it would be brought in by a plaintiff's attorney in a legal setting. So can you give some reassurance to those that the emergency declaration gives them some cover to operate beyond, of course safely, but gives them some cover to operate beyond that, as long as they are transporting hurricane-related supplies to the impacted area? And do you see it going beyond the 29th?
The emergency declarations are there to support emergencies. And first, I just want to say how much I feel for the people of Florida right now. The destruction, even as I've seen it on television, it's devastating. In my organization, we are working on first response and then also some strategies for recovery, how we need to support recovery in Florida. It's an active effort on our part. One of the tools we have is issuing hours of service waivers. We did that very quickly for 9 states right away. It is in effect till the 29th, and we will reevaluate when we get a little closer to that date. We place these hours of service in effect because we know that we need to support a certain emergent issue, and that's exactly what we've done here. So I would say that industry should sort of stay close around the 29th. Folks can check in with us anytime, and we'll evaluate the situation.
Madam Administrator, I want to turn your focus to the supply chain. The Secretary and your colleagues, fellow head of agencies, as well as the White House, has really put the supply chain, on the focus on the national radar. A two-part question: can you explain to what has been your reaction when you talk about FMCSA's role in, supply chain concerns, and also what is the agency doing in the near term to continue to facilitate the movement of freight along these supply chains?
Yeah, we once again, COVID has really cracked open a view into something that we maybe didn't have before, and supply chain is definitely something we as Americans understand more about today than we used to. Obviously, trucking is an incredibly important link in that supply chain. 75% of goods move by truck. We sit on the supply chain disruptions task force, playing our part there. And that means that we look at it from all angles. How do trucks interact with ports? How do trucks interact as they're moving through the country, state to state? What do we need in terms of CDL holders to make sure that we've covered? We have enough drivers that are equipped and ready. So in the short term, there are things that we are focused on, like unclogging the ports. That was sort of job number one. It's just exacerbated an already difficult situation. There's some other things that I'm aware of, like pop-up container yards that have gone up, making sure containers are ready to go, cleaning them out quickly. And then one thing that I just think is a great effort on the part of our colleagues in the Office of the Secretary is a data initiative called FLOW that collects better data from the private sector industry in a great partnership that helps to understand and potentially even predict when we're going to need to step up in certain areas of the supply chain. There's some other things too that are maybe not what you hear about first on supply chain, but are very central to FMCSA's role, and I think it's important to mention. And one is that, before we improved the training standards, a driver or a person who wanted to get a CDL, only 60% passed the test on the first try. That doesn't help supply chain. We aren't able to have drivers that are trained well so that they pass on the first time. Someone's knocking on my door, which means it's must be time, but it's not helpful to the supply chain when drivers are not trained well enough so that they pass and they get out on the road. So we've improved our training. We've done it very recently, so we'll measure on the back end to see if we are producing more CDL holders quickly. And then most importantly, is the quality of the job. We want drivers to stay.
Administrator, we know we're short on time, but real quickly, what's your level of optimism as we go into the retail season, this big fourth quarter, a lot of shopping, a lot of activity? What's your level of optimism? A short answer, and then we'll let you go and tend to your other business. But thank you for joining us.
It's something that the entire team addressing supply chain is tracking very closely. And we'll continue to do that as we lead up into holiday season. Thank you so much for the opportunity today to join you today.
Administrator, thank you. In closing, we want to thank the administrator of FMCSA, Robin Hutcheson, for joining us and being so generous with her time to answer our questions. We also want to thank our sponsor for this, Shell, for making this Transport Topics Newsmakers possible. We appreciate their fine support. Going forward, we're planning more of these Newsmakers in the near future. We'll have an announcement soon about when the next webcast will be and who our guest will be, of course, coming up. Also, this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing. Go to ttnews.com for more information how you can watch our interview with Robin Hutcheson. Again, from my colleague, Eugene Mulero, I'm Dan Ronan with Transport Topics and ttnews.com. We thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.